Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I'm your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and our guest today is Amy Stuart. Amy is the #1 best-selling author of 3 novels, Still Mine, Still Water, and Still Here. Shortlisted for the Arthur Ellis Best First Novel Award and winner of the 2011 Writers Union of Canada Short Prose Competition, Amy is the founder of Writerscape, an online community for hopeful and emerging writers. Amy lives in Toronto with her husband and their 3 sons, and her new book is Death at the Party. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. Killer
It's
women. I love it.
I know we are killer women. So tell our listeners a little bit about A Death at the Party.
Okay. So A Death at the Party, speaking of killer women, starts very first page. We have Nadine Walsh, who is the host of a big party she's throwing. But she's in her own basement standing over a dead body. And we don't know who is dead or why. And then we rewind to that morning where she's at her sink in the kitchen getting ready to start her day of planning this big party, or the final touches. So we, as the reader, know that someone ends up dead at the party, but she doesn't know that yet. So we sort of follow her throughout her day as she interacts with her friends and family, and we understand the mysteries and struggles and conflicts in her life and how they could ultimately lead to someone's death.
Murder.
So that's right.
Yes, and I mean, it has so many wonderful elements because that sort of the whole frazzled. She's throwing a birthday party for her mother, who is a famous writer,
author.
and there's right, and there's all that, like, the day of party stuff that we've all been through, where it's just like so incredibly chaotic. Can you tell us about this, like where the story came from? Do you remember what the seed was? Can you share that? I love hearing about that.
So the seed is so Mrs. Dalloway, which is a 1920, I was looking it up yesterday. It's 1925 Virginia Woolf kind of classic novel, and it is the exact same premise. So it's set over it's a woman, Clarissa Dalloway, who's planning a party that's happening, a garden party that night, and she's in the final stages. So she, just like Nadine, she's in her kitchen, I have to think about flowers and all that stuff in the morning. So I always thought, like, wouldn't it be fun? We see these now, like, people will take classic novels, Jane Austen novels, and try like a romantic modern twist on it. So what if you did that, but you did the killer twist? So you took and actually PD James did that with Pride and Prejudice. She, like, Death Comes to Pemberton, where she took a classic story and threw a murder in.
Right.
So I wanted to sort of play with that. And so, I mean, A Death at the Party and Mrs. Dalloway are very different novels. Like, this is clearly a thriller,
just the setup,
but the premise is pretty much a true homage. Like, it's a woman over the course of a single day. And I think, ultimately that sense of what women endure, sometimes over a day, or just in the wider scheme of things, in terms of the pressures on us to sort of keep it together. That is something that is very true in Mrs. Dalloway, and definitely in this book too.
Exactly. And and really, it's like, I'm not even sure her mother wants a party that is this big, right? It's sort of this compulsion also that we have to sort of like outdo ourselves, or and then we build all this pressure onto ourselves, and it's insane making, which, as we understand, can lead to murder. One of the wonderful things about your story that I really appreciated was the mother-daughter relationship. So Nadine is a daughter, obviously her mother, but she's also a mother, so she has a son and a daughter. So can you talk about sort of, how that interests you, and sort of your thoughts on how that fed the book?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think mother-daughter dynamics in particular are, can be wildly complicated, but also like fiercely loyal. And can have the capacity to be all of those things at once. Like you can have fierce loyalty for somebody while also resenting them and being, maybe even afraid of them, or all these different aspects of the same relationship. So I have two sisters, and I'm still like very close with my mom, whose name is also Marilyn. So
Oh,
I
funny.
did name the mother character after my mom.
Well, it's good that,
Um,
yeah, okay, well, that's risky. That can be risky, right?
yes, but I mean, I think Marilyn I think she's a pretty great character. Like if she
She
was
is.
evil, I would not
Yeah.
have done it.
Yes, right,
But she's
right,
because my mom is definitely not evil.
right.
But I think like the fierce loyalty and the way you can sort of get frustrated, and especially in this novel, like Marilyn had Nadine when she was quite young. So as you get older, like the relationship can morph into something almost sisterly.
Yeah,
Um, because I think they're 20 years apart.
right.
So, and then in terms of her as a mother, so I'm just entering, like, my oldest son is 15. I have 15, 13, and 11. So two
Wow.
teenagers now. And so I've been thinking a lot about how your relationship with your kids change as they become adults, who are like, I mean, they're not adults at 15, but you know what I mean? Like where
Yeah,
they have a very distinct thought process from you and
yeah,
decision making, and they have very rich internal lives and external lives, and most of their day is spent completely separate from you. And
yeah,
actually, when they're teens, what can be distressing is how few touch points you can sometimes have with them. I mean,
right.
sometimes I think, like, at 7 o'clock, I'm like, oh my God, we haven't even spoken to each other today. Or, aside
Yeah,
from like, hello, whatever. Um, so just as a parent, I mean, and you also get to the point where you're starting to navigate a part of the era of your relationship with your kids where you remember it. Like I remember being a teenager,
mm-hmm.
and now I'm navigating that as a parent. And even though I'm in my 40s, like being a teen doesn't feel like that long ago to me.
Right, right.
So
It's
then you're like,
crazy.
huh. And then you're thinking, okay, what's he doing? But what was I doing at that age? Like,
Right,
it's not like I was a saint. And
right.
especially, because we didn't grow up with the same kind of surveillance options that, like, I mean, I left the house when I was 16, and like my parents had no way of reaching me until I
Right,
called or showed up at home. So
right.
I just navigating that myself. Like, how do you cope with the fear and this sort of unease associated with your kids, like untethering from you? And
Yeah,
and that
yeah,
that sort of emerged, I think, with Nadine. Obviously, there's layers of complexity because it is a thriller. Can't just be
right,
like, oh, my daughter's going to the soda shop. It's like, no. There's actually really dark stuff going on. So,
right.
um but that fear and just sort of constant sense of unease that comes with your kids being out in the world and
Absolutely. I mean,
separate
it's
from
funny
you.
because, it's also funny to be a parent, and it's time when your children can track you. Like Nadine
Yeah,
gets tracked, right? They send her
I
off
know,
on an
that's
errand.
funny.
Kids are like, "What are you taking so long for?" It's like, it's kind of, also a
And
different,
you forget, we do that in my family. We have all have each other like
yeah,
tracked.
us too.
And
Yeah,
then, but what's wild is that, you might say, where are you? Oh, I'm almost home. And then you realize, well, that's not totally true. And
right,
now they can track me. So
right.
you have to be careful. I mean,
Yeah,
like a fib, right? You're not hurting
right.
anybody by saying, oh, I actually left my friend's house 20 minutes ago, instead of, oh, I'm putting my shoes on right now. Like you're not
Exactly,
harming
exactly.
anybody, but now
No,
you're like, oh, they know I'm
right. I'm
lying.
almost home means I'm leaving wherever I am right now. That's totally what I'm
Exactly.
almost home means, right? Yes.
Exactly.
That is so true. Well, it is. I think you're absolutely right. It's just a different world. And it gets even, my kids are now 23 and 21. And it gets
Right.
even, stranger because
Yeah,
they are absolutely adults. They are, and I still sort of like, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I still like to see that they're in their homes.
I
But
know.
it is, you know,
I think that's, I mean, looking at my mom, she has three daughters. We're all in our 40s now. Um, I don't think that I don't think, I mean, you detach and I
right.
think you develop trust, but I don't think it ever fully goes away that,
Mm-mm.
if your kids are suffering through something or having
You
an
worry. Yeah.
experience you worry about them. And so it is that kind of realize, I mean, I think you think when you're in the throes of having babies, um, that things are just going to get easier. And in a way they do, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't have someone hanging off you all the time, but
Right.
it's just a different kind of it sort of consumes you, and it just in a
Right.
different way.
It's like little kids, little problems, big kids, big
Yes,
problems,
that's right.
right? So,
That's
and
right.
that is, that can be so super terrifying, right? And nowadays, I
Yes,
feel like there's so many ways for things to go totally wrong and be caught on film. So
I know.
that's so
Well,
scary. But
and that's yeah, that plays, that's part of this, with no spoilers, but there is that element here of,
yeah,
teenagers. I always say to my kids, like, anything that's being recorded or tracked can come back to haunt you. So you have to be very
yes,
careful.
yes. Be very smart. Much smarter. They have to be much smarter than we had to be. So on
Yes.
page, okay, I like to tab little things I love in books, and on page 138, there's this great line. This is her mother talking. But the numbers on marriage just don't crunch.
Oh.
Did you know that statistically murdering someone is a far safer bet than marrying them?
Mhm.
Which I love.
Yeah.
It's
You know
like,
what? That's what's funny about that. So when you're working on a book, and the way whatever your process is, the way you're building, and I find that I often will write little scenes that become sort of key to the characters, and that scene, it shifted in terms of time and place and where it belonged in the story, but that scene, if she's kind of, the mother is holding court, it's a memory, right? So
yeah,
Nadine's remembering a previous party where her mom is holding court at a dinner party. So her mom never married, has been sort of a, single her whole life. And but she's saying, marriage, statistically, you're better off killing somebody than, marrying them, because like your chances of getting caught for murder are lower than your chance of divorce. And that is actually statistically true. Like
isn't that
her
crazy?
numbers are very, I think the odds are 50% that in a murder that there will be an arrest of any kind, and then from there only a 60% conviction rate. So then the
Hmm.
total math is like 30% of
Versus like 50% of
yeah,
marriages end in
40 or
divorce or something.
50% of
Yeah,
marriages. So she's sort of making a joke, but the I tried in this book to have these moments of kind of lightness, like where it's
yeah,
dark, but it's kind of
yeah.
funny because everyone who's married at that party is like, the joke doesn't
Yikes.
quite
Right.
land. They're all like,
Yes.
oh, whoops. And
Yes.
then, some people sort of get tense. And
Right.
um, so yeah, that was an early scene for me, especially in terms of really trying to sort out who Marilyn was, that she's kind
Hmm.
of this witty, funny, um, never married, like strong woman.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a really good one. There's another one actually that I also really struck me. On page 129, I love that. I'm always like, I'm just my bibliography. It tells me where they are. It's like there's a the situation where they're talking about one of the characters who touched one of the younger women,
Mm-hmm.
and it says he closed his hand around my bare arm and sort of
Mm-hmm.
rubbed my skin with his thumb. It wasn't a grope. My dad didn't even notice, but I remember the feeling. Girls just have that built-in sense. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can detect when a man is touching you, like you're, and it's that transition between being an adolescent woman and being, you know, a
An
woman,
adult.
yeah,
Yeah.
an adult, or even looking like an adult, right? Like, oftentimes we look our bodies develop ahead of, our brains. And so there's this awkward tension between the the world of men generally and how we feel, how adult we women feel, right? Which I think is another sort of very real reality about being a teenage girl.
Absolutely. I mean, I think even I can remember that.
Hmm.
There's this one memory I have of walking down the street in Toronto with my best friend at the time, and we'd just gone to see Married to the Mob. So I'm going to age myself.
Right. Yes,
That's
I understand.
um and I think we were in the 7th grade or something. So
Yeah.
we were like 13.
Yeah.
And we walked up this busy stretch of Yonge Street, which is kind of the main
Hmm.
drag road in Toronto. And over the course of the 6 or 7 blocks getting from the theater to back to her mom's house, we had so many like and like men passing us, and just thinking like, don't they know I'm 13? And
Yeah.
then sort of in this very immature way trying to decipher like what's worse, that they don't know I'm 13, that they think I'm older than I am, or that they do. Like,
And they don't
what of
care.
those two,
Hmm.
what's worse, that if you said to them she's 13, that they wouldn't stop what they were doing, or that I look older than I am and now like going to be subjected to this kind of treatment when I'm really not ready or
Right.
equipped for
Right.
it.
It's so
So
it's
what's worse? And you're just sort of like, and then mixed in with that, those two sort of fearful elements, is this you're happy for the attention, which
right.
adds this whole other layer where you're like,
Right.
ooh, they think we look old and we're pretty,
Hmm.
and whatever you're thinking. And so even the kind of dirty old man element, which is
Hmm.
something the book touches on, um you're willing to forgive it in a way that's really not good.
Because we're taught, at such an early age through society to want to be wanted, right? To want to look pretty, to want to
Yes,
be that
yes.
attention from other people is a key indicator as to whether or not we're successful, if you will,
Valuable.
or
Yeah.
right, valuable. Yeah. It is really
And not
interesting.
only that, beyond that, and I think this is like truly a theme in this book, it's the idea that um as women, and this starts when we're girls, there's the expectation of um poise, right? That
Yeah.
and poise is a word that repeats so often in this book, because it's the
Hmm.
idea that you're not supposed to lose your cool. It's
Right.
not ladylike to
Right.
raise your voice, or
Right.
even if your dad's friend touches you in a way that makes you uncomfortable, what would happen if you made a scene?
Right.
You know what I
You,
mean? Would your dad, would your family members get mad at you if you say,
right.
I don't want to go sit on that man's lap, or
Right.
I don't like it when he touch it, like I don't like
Right.
that. So there is an expectation that we not upset the
Hmm.
apple cart, that we
Right.
keep things, and that starts really
It
young.
It totally does, and not only that, like, it's sort of like if you were to say something, there a lot of times the reaction would be like, "Oh, you're just being silly." Like, you're to the point of where, like, now you sound hysterical, which is another word that
Right.
always comes up for women, right?
Right.
It's
Or
I've never heard a man.
paranoid, or no, paranoid, hysterical. And one thing that I felt I was really trying to play with in A Death at the Party is the idea that, I think that pushing like just how bad could things get, and you'd still be able to maintain your poise. And what's so interesting is that the women in my life would never question that you could have absolute chaos happening and that you would still maintain your poise. And actually, to use this really sort of devastating example of that, a few weeks ago was the anniversary of the Challenger shuttle
Oh, yeah.
explosion. So I guess it's 37 years or 30, something like that. And there's a video that's of the parents of the astronauts and their reaction in real time as the shuttle explodes, and how there's these two moms of astronauts who, like, if you think about what they've just witnessed,
Mm-mm.
and how they just, someone turns to say something to them and they smile at them, and you can see her sort of obviously catch a sob, but she's still smiling and sort of pulls her coat tight and says excuse me to try to get down off the. And I'm just thinking, like, anyone who has any doubt about the degree to which women can hold it together in the face of like catastrophic loss, like it's so
Right.
ingrained in us,
Right.
and how even in that moment, if she
Yeah.
had done what she had every right to do, which would have been like melted down and
Yeah. Buckle.
screamed and
Yeah.
grabbed the person next to her and said, what is happening, what is happening, people would have been uncomfortable with that. Like
Right.
there's no scenario that allows us, that frees us from the expectation of poise. There really isn't. There's really no true
So
scenario.
interesting. And I'd like to think that, that woman's generation, things are a little bit better, but I think you're still
Yes.
right.
Oh, definitely.
I think, and we do watch those. I mean, it's like watching a car accident, the watching people's reaction to to really horrible things. And it is, we do, when we see those women who are people in general who really break down, it is like, it does touch something in us that's uncomfortable. Like, oh my God, that's a lot of emotion. But of
Right.
course, like that person has every right to do exactly that and feel that way. But we're trained.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
we are trained. And like you said, I do think it's getting better.
Yeah.
But I think that we all still fundamentally feel it. Like,
Yeah.
don't
Oh,
cry too loudly, even at your, your most beloved's funeral. Like
right.
it really is sort of, and that was kind of a fundamental theme in this book is, the trick I'm trying to play is just how bad can things get. And
Yeah.
Nadine's still like, do you need more champagne? Is
Right.
everything okay? Like,
Right.
at her
Right.
party, when this absolute chaos is happening around her, in both in her head and
Right.
externally.
And it's the perfect position to put her in, is the hostess, right? Because that's the person who has to,
Yes,
there's
yes,
no
yes,
getting away from
yes.
the party, there's no
No.
pretending, you have to be on sort of the whole time. So this is the first of your books that I have read, and I'll
Yes,
look forward to going back. But I'm curious about sort of it's like this is a sort of like domestic thriller, right?
yes,
It's
yes.
all about the
Yep,
family
yep.
and the small neighborhood and the peripheral people who are a lot of them friends, they've known for a
Old
long time.
friends. Yep.
Is this kind of like what, is this sort of the kind of things you like to explore in your novels?
Yeah, so the first 3 books that I wrote, I think I have them here, were like a sort of what I would call like a linked
Yeah.
series.
Yeah.
So they are I got them all. They are well, one is the UK version, but you can see. So the first was Still Mine, and
Okay. Yep.
then Still Water, and
Yep.
then Still Here. This is the UK version, but you still
Yes.
get the idea. So I say like linked series. Obviously, you can tell by the titles. Like
Yes. Yeah.
it's a 1, 2, 3. But I wrote it and it was edited so that they could be read as standalones. But they sort of have like the main character. Her name is Claire. She is sort of investigating, definitely the domestic noir, but there is a more almost like procedural element
Okay.
to those books.
Is she an
Uh
investigator? Is the
no,
character?
yeah, so she isn't, but she
Okay.
sort of falls into that role in the
Right.
first book. Like,
Got it.
she ends up looking for someone who's missing. So she's not like, I'm putting a sign on my door and now I'm a PI. It's not like that at
Right.
all. She sort of falls into that role and ends up searching for a missing person. A missing woman. So, I think a lot of the themes around sort of domestic life and how that can go awry are sort of consistent. But when I finished the series and wanted to move on to working on standalones, I think there were certain things that I knew I was going to stick with, which is like, sort of female lead, strong female lead. But I really like the unreliable, almost kind of like super flawed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, I think the thing with Nadine is I really like the fact that we really get like because it's first person, so we're getting her internal thoughts, like she's really giving it to us,
Yeah.
like no filter.
Right.
And I think that too, like what we think, the same thing with poise, where how you can have a smile on your face and be thinking like the most devastatingly
Absolutely.
ungenerous or mean thing about the
Right.
person you're talking to.
Right. But I mean, to me, it's a very relatable character, right? Because we've all been put in that situation where you literally are thinking, I'd really like to kill you right now, right? But you're like, you're doing it with, because we, like you said, we've been trained to sort of to maintain our poise. And I sort of, I mean, I obviously I think there's for sure Nadine is flawed, but I didn't find her unlikable because I think that brutal honesty is so it's so fair, and she's right, she hits on the things that I think most of us have experienced at one time or another, whether maybe
Absolutely.
not so violently, but definitely
No,
experienced.
and that's really, like, I think particularly with the domestic noir, like the genre is just taking this sort of mundane elements of everyday
Hmm.
life and just like nudging them into like that thriller
Right.
territory.
Right.
And sometimes the stuff that we are dealing with, if you think about um PTA meetings or
Right.
parent teacher interviews or dealing with your neighbors, and you just think like, I mean, we all read the newspaper or like
Yeah.
People magazine. We all
That's
know
right.
how fast think relationships can go south, or how,
Totally.
I think the other theme that carries through all of my books is how we have like serial killer type murders, and then we have the vast majority, I think, of crime which is committed by people who genuinely think that they're either desperate, or they're avenging something, or they're protecting something, or trying to get something,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Like, it's not people who are like, I'm evil, therefore I'm going to commit this crime. They feel justified in
Yeah.
what they're doing, and they
Right.
don't see themselves as bad people. Maybe they think they did a bad thing, but that, I think, that is where most criminality lies, where
Yeah.
it's in like
Oh,
just
for
that
sure.
difference between, okay, I'm going to do this to my neighbor because I want to protect my family, I want to protect my home, I'm mad at them for what they did to my tree, whatever it is. It's like, can be the most ridiculous things.
Right.
um but there's so much, like, it's just such a treasure trove when you think about those relationships, neighbors,
Yes.
friends, family. um
Spouse, all of it. It's so
I know.
true. It's so true. And speaking of that sort of sense that, there's so much going on, Nadine has a really a fun conversation with her husband, Paul, where she says, I'm the one who holds everything together. I'm the one who fixes things when they fall apart.
Mhm.
Sometimes you know nothing about it. That's not me lying to you. That's a luxury I'm affording you. You were
Mhm.
spared the grind in so many ways that there's an entire ocean under the surface that you never have to
Mhm.
contend with. And it's funny, I actually took a picture of that and sent it to my husband. I was like, and he's like, it's so true. I mean, this is like that
It is.
totally
And that's
struck a nerve.
actually like, I think in these days there is sort of a lot more out there about that. Like, they call it like what, the emotional load, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, the difference is, you might think that things are equal, or more equal than they are, in part because you have no idea Like
Right.
if you're unloading the dishwasher, I know you're unloading the dishwasher. So
Right.
we can both
Exactly.
register that as something you did, but there's entire sort of, as I say, and I think that that's a pretty, I feel pretty generally pretty lucky in my own marriage. But definitely we had that issue,
Yeah.
particularly when kids came along, and now when there's a lot of emotional labor with the kids where you're trying to figure stuff out. That is it, where it's like, just because you don't know, you're
Yeah.
truly like absolved of it, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's not happening. And I think, like, if I think about my friends and everybody, that is truly the most consistent issue.
Yeah.
As we sort of gain this sense of equality in relationships where, most of us are not in the situation anymore where there's one like clear breadwinner, and
Right.
then you make dinner and come home and hand your spouse a drink, and
Right.
that's not how it is anymore. But that emotional element hasn't evened up.
And also, I think because women are in general, like, no, obviously these are stereotypes, but the more emotional creature, when there's an emotional situation with a child, it tends to happen between the child and the mom, right? So I find, like, if there's
Yes.
difficult things happening with my kids, they're more apt to come to me than to come to their dad, which in some ways I think is the ultimate compliment, right? And in other ways, I'm like, you don't want to talk to your dad about this? Are you sure you don't want to call dad? Because dad might have some thoughts. It's
Yes.
just, it's a lot. It can be a lot, you know. So,
Well, and I think that, I think, like, in my marriage, like, my husband is very solution oriented, and that's a
yes.
great way to be. But when there are especially these days, like with so many unknowns, and there are so many things out there where there kind of is no solution.
Right.
And
No
the
easy one. Right.
strategy is to learn to just adjust to, even if you think of something like COVID, like, obviously, it's sort of not no longer having the same impact on our lives as it was 3 years ago. But that's a thing where you're like, you and we can't solve this. We just have to
Mm-mm.
help our kids navigate it, and it's a
Right.
changed world. And
It's a
how do
great
you do
example.
that?
Yeah.
And instead of being like, well, here are things I can do to fix it. um and I think it's very noble to want to fix things, but sometimes that emotional load is kind of carrying the stuff that's too, it's like you said, there's no simple
Mm-mm.
fix. It's
There's
too, things
no,
too
yeah.
complicated, or there's too many different tentacles at play where there's not just one answer. And
Right.
um
It's very true.
yeah.
I mean, it's a big job being a mom. So it's really fun to read. It was fun to read Nadine's story, and it makes, her reactions make sense. So can you tell us what you're working on now?
So yes, I'm sort of dabbling a little bit in sort of screenwriting, not
Yeah.
related to my own books, just trying, because I think it's like, I really like writing dialogue, and sort of
Yeah.
a fun way to keep writing without the pressures of starting a novel. But I have started super preliminary. I did actually, after I finished the last draft of A Death at the Party, which would have been like late summer,
Hmm.
I took some time off. Like, I really kind of needed to sort of
Yeah.
step
Yeah.
away from, so I took basically the fall. And even, even when I'm taking time off, like, I'm always still like,
Sure.
I have an idea, I'm going to sit down and write this. So I'm working on starting a novel now that's similar. I wanted to lean into the kind of more romp element. Like, that's such a strange word to use, but a thriller that where you're trying to sort of take the reader for a ride,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
the dark stuff, and lean into that kind of, some stuff is funny. Do you watch White Lotus on
I
TV?
haven't, but I've heard great
Oh
things
yeah,
about
yeah,
it.
you have to watch it. So
Got
that's a
it.
perfect example of something, that TV show is like super dark,
Yeah.
but you're laughing, and sometimes
Yeah.
you're laughing like uncomfortably
Yeah.
at what's happening in the story. And so that's the kind of model, I think, the dark humor, while still staying very true to the thriller.
Yeah.
So I can't really talk about the plot because I'm not
Still
good
working
at
on it.
but
Well, and
yeah, but
actually sorry.
no, I just say I'm excited.
Yeah, it's always fun. New projects are fun, intimidating and fun, also fun. But actually, something we don't talk about enough, I think, on the podcast is the idea that this one a year, like, it's just an
And
impossible pace, and you have to fill the well. You have to stop and fill the well. And if you don't, then then everything suffers, right? Your home
yeah,
life,
and I actually, like, I've written, my pace is one every 2 years,
yeah,
and I have no idea how you could go any faster than that. Like,
yeah.
I just couldn't do it.
Well,
I think
certainly
partly
not with
because
3
of my
kids.
process, but also the way that I write. Like, I don't just, I think to be a one a year writer, you probably have to be like an outline, write a first draft, edit. You have to have a very sort of rigorous process, and I just can't do that.
Yeah, yeah,
Someday I hope that a novel will pour out of me, but that
yeah.
hasn't happened yet.
I
That
know,
has
right? We
not happened yet.
just plug our brains in and let it all just put itself on the computer,
Someone
and
said
I'll
that, a
just
writer said that to me once. They were like, "Oh, this one was actually pretty easy. It kind of just poured out of me." And I was like, that's like telling somebody that your labor was easy.
yeah, I know. You're like,
Oh,
that's
I
the kind of
just
news.
pushed the baby out. Didn't even hurt. It's like,
It's like,
no
yeah,
one
you
wants
should
to
probably
hear
say
that.
that and not share that with people. They're gonna stop liking you, talking to you. Yeah, that it does sound appealing. And I do think there are certain books that I think happen faster, but your process is your process, right? And if you speed it up, then the work suffers. So absolutely the right thing to do is to just let it take the time it takes.
Yeah.
So, well, so tell everybody where they can find you, um, social
Yes.
media and all that good stuff.
Yep. So I would say I'm actually probably these days most active on Instagram, which is
Hmm.
Amy Stuart Writer, Stuart with a U. But if you go to my website, which is amystewart.ca, I have everything there. Links to
Yes.
pre-order in the US and Canada, all my sort of social handles, everything is there. And I'm trying to sort of keep it updated with, like when the podcast comes out, and I'll make sure
Yes.
people know
Yes.
where
Well,
to
thank
find me.
you. Where to find you? Well, A Death in the Family, and this is a US version, which comes out the 7th of March.
Yeah, so
So
Canada, US, and same
Canada, yes.
cover, same
It's
cover,
beautiful.
same. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the cover.
I know, I do
It's
too.
so
The cover has like
perfect.
roses on it. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And peonies. They're
So
probably
peonies,
peonies.
yeah, they're peonies,
Hmm.
yeah. So it'll be out March 7th, which is like in 3 weeks,
I
which is
know.
wild. I
And
know.
I think actually, if people are listening to us, I think it's March 2nd right now. Or maybe
Oh,
March 7th.
great.
It's coming out
Okay,
right before
right
or
around.
around.
So when
I
people
should
hear
know
this,
this
they will
because
be.
I keep the schedule, but at any rate, I'm just gonna check. 3/14. So it's coming out a week
So okay, so
after.
by the time this is airing, it'll be out.
It's out. Go grab your copy of A Death at the Party
Yes,
and check out
yes.
Amy Stewart's, as she said, Stewart, STUART,
UART.ca.
online. And I have to tell you, 14 years in a row. Well, see, I think 14 years in a row, I went to the Toronto Film Festival.
Oh,
I'm on a little sabbatical in California because Montana is very cold this time of year. So I've been to the film festival, and the last 3 years we have not gone, but we're coming back this year. It's
oh,
so
amazing. It's the
fun. She's an author
best.
too, and we just love,
Yes.
yeah, we love it. We eat a lot of Indian food because that's my favorite, and you can't get a lot. You
Yes.
can't. There is a place now in Montana, but not
No, we have, Toronto is really
the
known for its
best,
Indian food.
the best
Yeah.
Indian food. And it's always fun to see the movies and catch sight of somebody famous walking down the street or whatever. So it's fun.
Yes.
I really love it, and I
It
love
is
Toronto. It's a
fun.
beautiful city. So
Thank you. I don't know if I can
well,
take credit
hopefully
for
we'll
that,
see you
but
live at a conference sometime.
yes, I would love that.
Okay.
And thank you
Well,
so
listen,
much for having me.
thank you so much for joining us, everyone. This was Amy Stuart with her book, A Death at the Party. Join us for the next Killer Woman coming soon. Bye.
Bye.